global health got started. 1997, we started inviting students to travel with us, and we mentor students, but they get to do the hands-on health care. And now we have over 1,000 volunteers traveling with us to underserved areas in the United States and abroad every year. But Mother Teresa used to say, and this was one of the, I taped this to my mirror, it's not my job to be successful, it is my job to be faithful. 26 surgeries, and like I said, probably 3 million to go. We're going to chip away. We will get there. But we're counting on students like yourselves to make those differences. And you got to recognize potential. This is Karen Cornell. I don't know if you can see this. She's got a trach here. Karen was like a daughter to me, or a little sister. We used to go out and get in trouble together. Karen was one of our champ campers, vent dependent. She had to be on a ventilator at night. And when she was in high school, she was a straight A student, but her vocational rehab counselor told her to get a job at McDonald's or learn how to do handicrafts in the home. Now, can you imagine that? Rather short-sighted. Ultimately, she got her degree in medical social work, traveled with me on she went to 7 different countries, 9 trips where we went and healed children, and this is her working in the Dominican Republic. You got to be true. Anybody from Westfield? Any of you from Indiana? This is my guardian angel, kind of a beat up picture. I still carry her picture in my wallet. I had just gotten back from working with Mother Teresa, and I'm literally running through the cancer treatment center because I've finished my rounds. Now I've got to get to clinic. I run by this young lady sitting in her recliner getting her chemotherapy. As I ran by, the nurse yells, "Margie, that's the doctor that met Mother Teresa," and this beautiful bald-headed girl from Westfield High School, she jumps up, grabs her IV pole, and ran me down. And she said, "Tell me about Mother." Well, Margie was getting her wish granted by the Indiana Children's Wish Fund, and she was going to get a Versace gown for the prom. I always love saying that because the girls are always like, "Makes sense." Guys are like, "Whatever." Anyway. So she was getting a Versace gown, and then she meets me. We start talking. I gave her a rosary that Mother had blessed, and she changed her wish. Instead of getting the gown, she decided she wanted to go with me to take care of the children in India. So Mother died September 5th of 1997, and Margie and I got over there in February of 98. We came back from the trip, and within just a couple weeks, she was riding with her mother. She shifted her weight, and her hip fractured, so we knew the cancer was back with a vengeance. And we opted, I remember it was a very painful thing to say, is there any more to do? And, she was 17 years old. Well, Margie and I had a good cry, and we hugged and talked, and she said, she was born in Quito, Ecuador, and her mother was from Carmel, Indiana, her father from Quito. So she was born there, lived her first 4 years there. But we talked, and I said, "I promise you, we'll take care of the kids in Ecuador." She said, "I promise you I'll be your guardian angel." So when people ask me why the commitment to Ecuador, not only is it that I believe in the community and the way those people function, but I promised her. In this country, we become too legalistic. It's like you got to have a contract for your lunch money anymore. It's ridiculous. In India, I loved working in India. I was working with the Tamil people, and at some point we'd be talking, and we'd say, "Here's what we have in mind. We could do this clinic if we set this up in the school and do that." And as we were talking, at some point, the Tamil elder would hold up his hand and he'd say, "My people know your people," which was, it's accepted, it's understood. We move forward. We didn't shake hands, we didn't sign a contract, we began working together in community. Incidentally, Timmy Global Health is a not-for-profit 501c3, which is a tax description basically. Every bit of work we do, because I've seen this, I worked with lots of not-for-profits, and I feel like so many times we get even territorial in the not-for-profit realm. It made sense to me that if we create a not-for-profit that must work through other not-for-profits, then we'll get things done. We have to work side by side with the people in the communities. We do not come in and create mission, we actually come in and support the work that's being done. So in memory of Margie, I've had to remain true to that promise. Now, along those lines, I've often said, being an animal science major, we need to circle up like a bunch of yaks. Anybody know about yaks? My gosh, what? Seriously? You don't know about yaks? Okay. In the wilderness, when predators come around, yaks gather all the young together. And then you see how they go shoulder to shoulder, and they face out and they face down the predators. And that I've been saying, we need to do that in healthcare, but we need to do it in many areas. To me, there are 3 areas that I think should be devoid of that corporate mentality, and frankly, education, healthcare, and religion. Whatever you choose as a religion or not, those should not feel like businesses, if you ask me. So I said, that's the beauty of the internet. You know, I remember when I first did this, it's like yaks, circle, and there we go. Now, you got to be selfless. Now, Padre Carolo, this was the priest that had Margie's memorial service when I went down to Ecuador one year after her death. And Padre Carolo took me to this location, and he said, Dr. Chuck, it'll cost me $500,000 to build this hospital. He wanted to build a 100-bed hospital, so it's $5,000 a bed. He said, I had $100,000, so we bought the land, put in the drainage, built the foundation, fenced it in. He said, now I pray. And I remember saying, hey, could you come to the U.S. and be my CFO? Because I like the way you think, right? What's a child's life worth? My guess is if your life as a child, or in the future when you have children, you're probably going to think, yeah, they're probably worth $500,000 anyway, right? Right? So I like the way this guy thinks. And I said, come to the U.S. and be my CFO, which would probably be more like Chief Faith Officer rather than Chief Financial Officer. Too much of what happens in our country anymore is, do we have the money to do it? I will tell you, I have not accomplished what I've accomplished by setting my goals down here based on how much money is in my bank account. I love being challenged by the doctors and the people that I work with around the world. I remember one of them coming to see me once, and he said, I have this idea. This guy was working in Haiti. His life had been threatened many times. He'd been imprisoned and tortured, and he still went back to helping the poor. He'd had a gun put to his head every time he came to visit me. And when he came and rolls out, I have some plans, I rolled him up and said, you're one person that doesn't have to show me plans. How much do you need? And I actually wrote a check for him when I didn't have the money in the bank. I like that kind of person. Those are the people who inspire you to do more. Now, that hospital ended up being 139 beds. Here it is. The economy crashed. Inflation was a mess. It cost us $7.2 million to build a 139-bed hospital. But just for comparison, the rate for building a hospital in the United States is now $2.8 to $3.4 million per bed. So you wonder why you're paying so much? You could talk about Affordable Care Act, how much health care insurance is, because we think we have to have 5-star hotels that happen to do a little bit of health care. It's ridiculous. I've never seen a building heal somebody. It can be done much cheaper. Whoop. Now, you got to be compassionate. I mentioned Mother Teresa already. Scarlett Kramer is a good friend of mine. She used to live in Zionsville and has moved out to Arizona, but she captured Mother like I think nobody did in these sketches. And I used to do this when I'd round in the mornings at the hospital. The nurses were in changeover, so I typically rounded 3 times, twice in the morning and then at least once at night. But you want to go by and see the kids and socialize with them, right? And encourage them. The kids that I take care of are the worst things you hear about in the news. Children run over by semis, shot in the head, 90% burns to the body, 70% burns to the body, arms, legs amputated, brain cancers. But I will tell you, they just have greater spirits than a lot of the people I run into every day on the street, like talk about zombies. But these kids, again, they'll teach you all these lessons. So I used to go around with these NICU grads, the little babies that were trying to get to grow enough where we can get them off the ventilators, all these tubes in there. I just said, if you can just get through there, and you try to show mom and dad this, but just get in there. And this had such important meaning to me because I would typically get in there and then cup their head and put my face to theirs and whisper in their ear, God loves you and so do I. I think they need to hear it. I think they need to feel it. I think you got to be humble. Now, at some point I was granted an audience with Pope John Paul II. Thankfully, I got to take one of my buddies with me. This was another wish through Indiana Children's Wish Fund, Joe Flitcraft, high school senior up in Rowan, Indiana. Went to North Miami High School, was in a sledding accident and broke his neck his senior year. Was probably going to play some football. In fact, really wanted to come to Purdue. But anyway, we ended up getting to meet with the Pope this was in 2001. And I remember coming back from this trip and people said, I think it's great Joe got to meet the Pope. I said, I think it's great the Pope got to meet Joe. Joe doesn't have a great title or anything. Oh, yes, he does. It's Super Joe. You see, Joe is a remarkable individual. When this happened and he became quadriplegic, couldn't use his arms and legs, and I remember the nurses were saying, something's wrong. He should be more depressed. I said, have you talked to him? Have you talked to him on how he sees all of this, the spirituality of what happened? His friend who was driving the snowmobile when he came out from behind it and hit the tree had congenital heart disease and had multiple surgeries, and Joe knew he would have died. And Joe said, life is different going forward. Joe is incredibly great with a computer. I connected him with a man from New Zealand, and he started sending him resources so that they could grow crops for the orphans in Kenya. So you see, at least a group of about 50, 60, maybe 80 orphans now in Kenya call him Super Joe. See? Everybody's got a gift. Oh, yeah, and Kylie Toy. Now, Kylie went to Oak Hill High School. She's from Converse, Indiana. She had cerebral palsy. It affected her right side. And I first met her when she was about 2 or 3, and she just adorable, flaming red hair, buck teeth, and she'd come down that hallway and she goes, where's my Dr. Chuck? I need to see my Dr. Chuck. And I'd go out there and we'd hug each other and go, yeah, it just makes your day. You get excited to see these kids. And I said, remember one time I was still playing ball. In fact, I've played my last year of semi-pro football when I was 45. When I broke my passing hand, I thought, well, maybe it's time to quit doing this. But this little girl taught me a valuable lesson. She came in and I said, are you still playing sports? She said, yeah, I'm still playing soccer. And I said, what about track? Aren't you running track? Despite her body working this way, she ran the 1.5 mile. Now, I might have copped out. I might have run the 100 meters. If your arm and leg aren't working quite right and the other kids finish and you can kind of step off the track, or you finish but you're only 10, 20 seconds behind. No, she ran the 1.5 mile and she ran it all. Even though people waited and had to wait for her to get there. Now, I said, aren't you running track anymore? She goes, oh, yeah. Oh, guess what, Dr. Chuck? I don't get last anymore. You see? It was just like, very good point. I'm just happy to be participating at my age. And then you got to be hopeful. This was after Hurricane Katrina. This is Jasmine. Smart little girl. She just needed to know the world might come back to normal. It's a natural disaster when even the McDonald's is closed. And this was Aletha. Aletha was something. I just said I was going to just put her in the bus and bring her back with us, but then you know how the media would get a hold of that. Humanitarian kidnaps. Aletha was awesome. And I was talking to her. She got trapped on the 3rd floor. She said the electricity went out, so she's sitting in her wheelchair in the nursing home just watching the storm. And I said, that must have been terrifying. She reaches over and pats me on the arm and said, honey, I was living through these long before they started naming them. Oh yeah, and then on occasion, you might just have to get your buddy, like this guy here. See that big old cheesy smile on his face. This kid was a troublemaker in high school. He and his friend were pulling a joke on this girl who's a friend of theirs. His friend puts a gun in his mouth, pulls the trigger, and there was one in the chamber, gets shot in the brainstem. Ends up, he's ventilator dependent. He's driving a wheelchair. Speaking of biomedical engineering, you put like a retainer in the mouth. He drove it with his tongue. And then he was on a ventilator. And the nurses came to me and said, if he could move, we're sure he would kill himself. And I thought, you're probably right. So how do we give him hope that there's life and joy beyond this? Well, we had this crazy idea. There was a snowstorm. We're actually out on the street here in front of the hospital. We took him out of his hospital bed, put him on one of our gym mats. This is our speech pathologist bagging him with an Ambu bag. And there's me in the Purdue rugby jersey. So I always like to point out that the CEO of the hospital is also involved in this. Usually when I'm teaching at the conferences, I'll go, any risk management people in here? Because you will not want to hear this. But it turned the corner for him. And then he went off to college and he studied psychology so he could work with troubled youth. I think he knows a little bit about that. Now, you got to be amazed. This is Ben, had CP and autism. This is my buddy Brian, one of my rugby buddies. He's 6'7", 320 pounds. He describes himself as tall, dark, and handsome. And I think you can see he's tall. Ben just threw me. All right, what's this got to do with anything? Well, I want to tell you this. Find your passion. Don't settle for a job. Do not give up your other passions. Enjoy life. I played more football and rugby in my 30s and 40s than I did in my 20s. I became a pro wrestler for 5 years. Why? Because someone asked me, would I want to wrestle? Hell yeah. So you might have seen me on cable television back in the 92 to 97, if you guys were even around then. But I used to supposedly draw up medicine and inject my opponents with sleeping medicine. I just know they got tired. And now, if you go on Vimeo or YouTube, you'll see some Timmy takedown. We get the kids out of their wheelchairs, get them in the ring, and we throw them around, and somehow they beat us and they win their own tag team championship belts. What's important to me is that these kids who have disabilities are given an arena to show their abilities. And so we've been doing this for about 20-some years also. As you can see, it can get ugly on occasion. We were being interviewed by a TV newsman one morning, and the guy said, so let me get this straight. The two of you are going to be in the ring fighting kids between the ages of 6 and 15, something like that. I said, yes, that's correct. We figure we're already past our primes, they're not quite there, so it ought to be fair. Brian said, look, and when Brian said, I mean, they had to rearrange the set for as big as he is. He's sitting there in a t-shirt, blue jeans, boots, and black glasses, and he goes, look, this is just a stepping stone for bigger things for me. And if it means a few kids have to get hurt, well, then that's... What was fun was to watch even the weatherman across the way going, something ain't right about this. And then be an inspiration. The kids are already watching you. You know that? That's the whole Timmy Global Health idea. It's tiered mentorship. Everybody thinks they want to do what Dr. Chuck does. Great. But there are many, many steps to get there. So the high school students are mentored by the college students are mentored by the medical students, the residents mentored, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, if you're in Jamaica or any other place, every kid I ever see, I take the stethoscope out of my ears, I put it in the ears of the child, and I want them to see that we're 99.99999% the same. We may look different, we may talk a different language or something, but for God's sakes, we're the same. And you never know, this just might inspire that little guy to get in the EPIC leadership program or become the healthcare worker for that community. And ultimately, you might get a cool reward like this someday. I spoke at a church several years ago. Dear Dr. Chuck, you probably don't remember me. I was at a talk you made at St. Luke Catholic. I was very touched by your talk. However, I'm not old enough to go around the world helping people with you. However, I hope what I'm enclosing can help you. Also, I'm not including my name, if you would. Just call me Z. Hope this helps. Sincerely, Z. P.S. I haven't included any coins. They'd make too much noise. $59 cash in that envelope. I received it 2 days after that talk. Z. I don't know, Zorro? Zoe? Zach? Saying, what, Z's, what else? Zachariah? I'm trying to think. Well, the good news is there was a return address on the envelope. So for years, I wrote to Z Barnstead on Stafford Lane. Dear Z, just so you know, you've changed the world. As I'd go around, I'd pass that around. It was sacred money. I couldn't even put it in the bank. It'd go around the room, come back with hundreds, thousands of dollars. People just kept stuffing money in there. And I was like, well, this is great. It became a fundraiser. I didn't expect it to. So I wrote to Z Barnstead on Stafford Lane and just said, just so you know, you've changed the world. Look forward to when you're old enough to go around the world with me. About 7 years later, I'm doing a walkathon at Eagle Creek, and I'm walking along with this lady. And I said, I'm Chuck. She goes, yeah, you came and spoke. You came and spoke at our church. And I go, which one was that? And she said, St. Luke's Catholic Church. And I said, what's your name? She said, Betty Barnstead. I said, you wouldn't happen to live on Stafford Lane. And she said, how would you know that? And I said, well, first of all, I've been writing to one of your kids for years, so you ought to know that probably. But I told her this story, and I just said, I feel like I'm betraying someone, but I think most moms would want to know that, wouldn't you? Yeah. And then be an instrument of peace. Back to St. Francis, first place I ever wanted to go, Russia, the former Soviet Union. So in 1992, I'm there taking care of children who were in a train accident with a lot of burns. And boy, they just don't look like enemies of the state to me. I have to tell you this, most important about this world going forward, get the politicians out of the way. You got to ignore these people. Go there yourselves. Establish friendships, work in community, and also learn to flip your eyelids inside out. Kids love this no matter where you go. So practice that. And do that even in the face of war. This is the most important picture I said I've ever shot. This was in the Kosovo refugee camp. Somehow that's the way the world should be. You got a vigilant parent and a child who doesn't understand how ugly the world is. That's what we need to protect, like a bunch of yaks. And ultimately take some time to celebrate. At the end of each semester, you get these exams done and that sort of thing. Go out and celebrate. Enjoy what you've accomplished. And then get buckled down to get going again, do what's necessary. This is actually in a war zone. I was staying in a partially built hotel with 110 refugees, and boy, she's got some vertical leap, doesn't she? But we just found some stuff around there, construction stuff, and this is one of the things we knew the United Nations said. The children just need some sense of normalcy. So we play. I can do that. That'll be good. And then ultimately, be thankful. Thank you for listening to my stories. Thank you for your interest in this. And thank you for what I presume you will do to make this world a better place. I appreciate it.
Well, all right. Thank you all very much. If you did not sign in yet, please make sure you do that on your way out. If you slipped in late, anything like that.